This is Behind the Verdict. I'm John Horford with Maureen Cook, and today we're going to talk about the JonBenét Ramsey murder. The JonBenét Ramsey case is one of the most infamous and widely discussed child murder cases in the United States. JonBenét Patricia Ramsey was a 6-year-old beauty queen who was found dead in her family's Boulder, Colorado home, December 26, 1996. The case has remained a mystery for decades and continues to captivate public interest due to the strange circumstances surrounding her death, the high-profile nature of the investigation, and the media attention that followed.
JonBenét Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990, to John and Patsy Ramsey. Her family was well off. Her father was a successful businessman, and her mother was a former beauty queen. JonBenét was a child beauty pageant contestant and had participated in various pageants, with some of her performances garnering media attention. Her family, particularly her mother, was heavily involved in the beauty pageant scene. On the night of December 25, 1996, JonBenét's family celebrated Christmas at their home. The next morning, JonBenét was reported missing, and a ransom note was found in the family's basement.
At around 5:30 a.m. on December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, discovered a ransom note on the staircase. The note demanded $118,000 for the safe return of JonBenét, a peculiar amount that coincidentally matched the bonus John Ramsey had received that year. The note was 3 pages long, written in unusual style, and appeared to be carefully crafted. It instructed the Ramsey family not to contact police and claimed that JonBenét would be killed if they did. The ransom note's length and complexity, along with the demand for a specific amount of money, raised questions about its authenticity.
Shortly after the ransom note was discovered, the police were called. However, a few hours later, John Ramsey and a family friend, Fleet White, searched the house on their own. Around 1 p.m., John Ramsey found JonBenét's body in the basement of their home. She had been strangled with a garrote, a device made from a cord, and had a severe head injury, possibly from a blow to her head. Her mouth was taped shut and her hands were bound with rope. Her death appeared to be the result of a violent struggle, but her body had been carefully positioned, raising suspicion that the crime scene was staged.
The police initially treated the case as a kidnapping, as they were led to believe by the ransom note. However, when JonBenét's body was found in the house, the investigation quickly shifted to a homicide. There were many unusual and puzzling elements of the case that made it difficult for authorities to draw clear conclusions.
The manner in which JonBenét's body was found led some to believe that the crime scene had been tampered with. The fact that she had been found in the basement, a part of the house that had not been searched before, raised suspicions that someone in the family had known where she was.
The note was scrutinized for its authenticity, with some experts claiming that it had been written by someone with knowledge of the Ramsey family, while others pointed out strange inconsistencies, such as the odd wording and the fact that it had been written on paper from the Ramsey's home. Additionally, the handwriting was never conclusively identified as belonging to anyone in the family, but many felt it was an odd choice for a ransom note.
Forensic evidence gathered from the scene, including DNA, was found to be inconclusive. Blood was found in JonBenét's underwear, but it didn't match any of the people close to her. This led to theories about possible intruders, although no evidence of an outsider was ever definitively found.
Both the Ramsey family and the police faced intense scrutiny. Initially, suspicion fell heavily on the Ramsey family, with some investigators speculating that JonBenét's parents, John and Patsy, might have been involved in her death. The Ramseys were criticized for their behavior during the investigation, particularly their handling of the ransom note and their interactions with the police. Despite multiple polygraph tests, which Patsy and John both passed, the couple became targets of widespread media attention, especially after law enforcement theorized that the murder could have been a case of family violence or an accidental death that was then covered up.
The police investigation also faced criticism for the way it was conducted. Several missteps were made, such as failing to secure the crime scene immediately, which allowed potential evidence to be contaminated. As a result, some of the evidence from the house was compromised.
One of the main theories that emerged over the years was that JonBenét had been killed by an intruder. This theory was based on the lack of conclusive evidence pointing to her parents, the strange behavior of the ransom note, and the fact that there was no clear motive for the family to kill JonBenét. This led to speculation that someone had broken into the house and committed the crime. However, no suspects were ever named or arrested.
In 1999, a grand jury was convened to determine whether anyone in the Ramsey family should be indicted for JonBenét's death. The grand jury ultimately voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey on charges of child abuse resulting in death, but the indictment was not pursued by the district attorney at the time. The reason for this decision was that there was not enough evidence to support the charges. The Ramseys were never formally charged, and they maintained their innocence.
In 2008, after years of public speculation and the continued investigation into the case, the Boulder District Attorney's Office exonerated the Ramsey family, citing DNA evidence that implicated an unknown male rather than any of the Ramseys. This was seen as a potential breakthrough, but it didn't resolve the case, and many questions remained unanswered.
In 2008, the Boulder Police Department officially cleared the Ramsey family of any involvement in the murder after DNA testing pointed to the possibility of an unknown intruder. DNA evidence on JonBenét's clothing did not match any member of the Ramsey family, and it was suggested that the evidence pointed to an unidentified male.
In subsequent years, the case has continued to garner attention from investigators, media, and armchair detectives alike. The case remains open, with some people still convinced that the Ramseys were involved, while others believe the true killer was an intruder who remains at large.
Over the years, several theories have emerged about who might have killed JonBenét Ramsey. Some of the most notable ones include
the family's involvement. This theory suggests that either Patsy or John Ramsey was involved in an accidental death that was covered up, possibly due to botched attempt to cover up child abuse or an accident during a sexual assault. However, there's no conclusive evidence to support this theory, and the family has always denied any involvement.
An intruder theory. Some investigators believe the murder was committed by an intruder, citing the lack of evidence pointing to the family and the unexplained DNA evidence found on JonBenét. This theory also suggests that the ransom note was a red herring designed to divert suspicion from the real killer.
The brother theory. Another theory suggests that JonBenét's brother, Burke Ramsey, might have accidentally killed his sister, either during a fight or as a result of a prank gone wrong. Some speculate that the family may have covered up Burke's involvement in the death. This theory was brought into the public eye in 2016 after a CBS documentary on the case suggested that Burke was responsible. However, no evidence has emerged to confirm this, and Burke Ramsey has always denied any involvement.
As of today, the case remains unsolved, and no one has been formally charged with JonBenét's murder. The Boulder Police Department continues to review new evidence as it emerges, and the case is considered an open investigation.
The JonBenét Ramsey case continues to captivate the public's imagination due to the unresolved questions, the eerie details of the crime, and the media circus that has surrounded the family for decades. It remains one of the most puzzling and tragic unsolved crimes in American history. Myrene, where do you want to start on this? A lot of directions to go.
I think we need to start in the beginning as what happened when they were discovering the evidence.
Okay.
So that morning, Patsy claimed that she got up very early and came down the back set of stairs to the home and found a ransom note on one of the steps closest to the bottom. Before we really delve into that ransom note, I think we need to talk about the layout of this house. This was a fairly large house. I think I remember seeing somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 square feet, something
Sounds
like
right.
that. But it had multiple floors. So my understanding is there was a basement level, a first floor, a second floor where the children's bedrooms were located, and then a third floor on top of that that looked to be like an attic area that John and Patsy Ramsey had converted to sort of a master's suite. So there was a round spiral staircase for the back of the house, and you could go down those stairs to the kitchen, go up the stairs to JonBenét's room and that side of the floor, and then go up another flight of stairs to her parents' room. But there was also a set of stairs at the front of the house. And the layout was somewhat confusing, particularly in the basement, from what I've read.
It must have been because police were unable to find JonBenét's body when they did that initial scan of the house, which is pretty strange, right? If you're looking for a child's body in a house, you would think that you would thoroughly check every single room, every single space where a 6-year-old child could potentially fit into. And yet she was found dead in this room, which either suggests that they either did a poor job searching or that her body was moved after they had done their initial search of the house. I don't know which way you sort of lean.
Well, Patsy placed the original 911 call at 5:52 a.m., so shortly before 6 a.m., saying that their daughter's been kidnapped and they found this ransom note. Now, I would assume, and I don't know if it's true, but I would assume they would have searched the entire house to make sure that she wasn't there, or to see if there was any evidence of a break-in or how they got out with their daughter or something to that effect. It doesn't sound like they did that, at least in any of the reports, the documentaries I've read, the news specials. It doesn't sound like that.
But I guess if you think about if there was genuinely no involvement from the family and you find this note, you might just automatically assume that she was taken and that she's not in the house. And your mind immediately just goes to, oh my God, how do we get her back? In theory, right?
Yeah, that could be a theory. Or the flip side theory is they knew she was in the house, they knew she was dead, and they didn't need to search.
Yeah, of course. Because where she was found, it wasn't like she was like hidden. It was sort of like you open the room, and you, like you said, the layout of the house is confusing, but you open the door to the room and she was just sort of laying there. It's not even like she was like hidden away.
It was a side door in a basement area that was a wine cellar, but the area of the floor was all open. So she wasn't like behind a wine rack or behind a shelf system or anything like that. She was right smack in the middle. Like basically if you opened that door, you were going to like maybe hit her leg or hit her part of her body with that. But I think it's interesting too. So the first law enforcement that arrived on scene arrived shortly after 6 a.m. And he did a cursory search of the house. And in one of the articles I read, it said that this law enforcement official went to open that door to that area, but then somehow got distracted and didn't open the door.
It seems like too much of a coincidence.
Doesn't it?
It really does.
So then what we're looking at is from 6 a.m. until 1 p.m., they have multitudes of people coming in and out of that house. The Ramseys had family friends who came over to sit with them, comfort them, help them, whatever they could do. They had a plethora of detectives and law enforcement and other people in and out of that house. Yet no one did another search to look for clues. Now, wouldn't you, if you're law enforcement, go room by room, inch by inch in that house to look for any other clues that there might have been that this child was taken? At that point, you're looking for a broken window, you're looking for a pried door, you're looking for anything they might have left behind.
Especially because the ransom note was written on paper that came from inside the Ramsey's house, even though they said that it was not written by anyone in the Ramsey family. So the person had been inside the house, the person. So it makes a ton of sense that they may have done something else and there's additional evidence somewhere in the house. So yes, it's very strange.
Well, it is very strange. And they did handwriting analysis for John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey. They were able to determine that the note was not written by John, it was not written by Burke, but they cannot exclude Patsy as the author of that letter.
Okay. I thought that they determined that all of them.
No,
Okay.
not Patsy.
Not Patsy. That's interesting.
It is interesting. And then when they found the legal pad that it was written on, it was written from the home.
Mm-hmm.
It had Patsy's DNA on it, which, could be explained away and make sense because it was in her home and it was her legal pad.
Yep.
But there was a practice ransom note that was still attached to the pad. And so I think it started out something to the effect of, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey," and then that was abandoned. And then the actual ransom note said, "John Ramsey only." I don't know if you've ever seen any crimes or criminals who are going to take the time to be very polite. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey," change their mind and then change the tone of the note. That seems odd to me.
Criminals, they can have a code too.
Or somebody didn't know how to write a ransom note and figured out another way to do it.
But why wouldn't they throw away the original one? Why would they keep that there?
Because they didn't think about it.
It's a big thing to not think about if you're trying to cover up a murder in your own home of your own child.
Not if your child was murdered or accidentally killed. You're trying to save the other child. And maybe that's the theory. And if that's the case, you're not thinking as clearly as you might.
So with that being said, I mean, obviously there are multiple theories. Theories of the family, the parents being the ones who murdered JonBenét, the father being like sexually abusive in some way to JonBenét, Burke being the one who accidentally killed his sister. Let's first talk about, why do you think the 911 call came from the house 2 days before she was found?
So that's really weird. A 911 call was placed, and I saw an article that talked about it that said it was 2 days before she was found, but that they explained it away, that it was a drunk party goer who'd been at the house who inadvertently dialed 911.
And we had a discussion before we had started about this, because I was asking you, I was like, how long do they keep those calls? Because if someone calls into 911, you'd expect them to have a record, of course, of everyone who calls in and what was said. But they didn't have that, or they didn't look into that. You said that they keep them for at least 45 days, up to 60.
I looked for any indication of what was in that original 911 call, whether there was actual words, whether it was just a hang up, or if there was a report made. Generally speaking, if there's a 911 hang up, law enforcement go to investigate what it was, because it could be a crime and someone was prevented from following through with that. In Michigan, most places, most dispatch centers retain 911 calls anywhere from 45 to 60 days. Some retain them longer. So if this only happened 2 days before JonBenét's murder, it would seem reasonable that 911 call, or the evidence of a hang-up, or the evidence of law enforcement going to the home and checking to see what had happened, should have been available to be reviewed.
And why did we ever find out why it wasn't? Like, do we know why that wasn't the case?
I never found anything else on it other than there was a call and it was explained away.
Strange.
Very strange.
So then that will lead us back to some type of family involvement in theory, although they said that it was a drunk party guest. That sort of goes along with the paper that they used for the ransom note being in the house, the practice ransom note being in the house, the 911 call coming from the house 2 days before, which, is that JonBenét trying to call 911? Is that one of the parents trying to call 911 and the other parent being like, no, like, we'll just handle this ourselves? Like, what do you think that is? I mean, obviously we can't know, we don't know, but within 48 hours, that 6-year-old girl is dead. So in your opinion, who do you think caused, or who do you think murdered JonBenét?
That's a really hard question, because I think in looking at that call, we don't have enough information to say who we think did it, who we think made the call. Was it an accident? Was it a misdial? Or was it truly someone reaching out for help? That is a critical and crucial piece of evidence, I think, that we're missing. Now, if you look back, this would have been 2 days before, so this would have been placed on Christmas Eve, December 24th. if that's the case and the Ramseys were having a party, I would think law enforcement in their investigation would go back and interview the people who were there, interview the alleged drunk party who made the call to try to figure out exactly what happened. But I never saw any of that in the investigation. And quite honestly, though, the investigation had some problems right from the very beginning.
Is that because of the relationship the Ramseys had with law enforcement officers? Because why else do you overlook these things? Common sense. Why would you not look and get a record of the call just to hear what was said and see what was going on? Because maybe it really was a drunk party guest. And if that's the case, why don't you interview the people, like you're saying, that were at the party and just ask them if they saw anything strange? Because obviously they were in the house where JonBenét was killed, less than 2 days later. It feels like common sense. How could law enforcement overlook that?
To try to give some deference to law enforcement in the case, maybe they did, maybe they reviewed it, maybe they went to the home and found nothing, but we don't know if they did or they didn't. They haven't released that information, at least not in any of the documentaries I've watched, in any of the podcasts I've listened to, or any of the, at this point, so many articles that I've read on this case. So maybe they did, but they certainly never shared that with the public. But I do think that one of the biggest problems with this case, and one of the reasons it has not been solved in over 20 years, is because there were some missteps by law enforcement right from the very beginning.
What were the biggest missteps in your opinion?
Well, again, they didn't search the house well enough to find JonBenét. They didn't limit the number of people coming in and out of what the entire house would have been a crime scene. They had people in that house for 5, 6, 7 hours before they booted everybody out.
Yeah. Is that them just being like too empathetic, too human? Like they want to be comforted. Like these people are coming in, bringing them food, bringing them kind words, and they don't want to get in the way of that. Like, just literally letting their empathy overtake their rational mind and being like, hey, this is also a crime scene. And they're essentially messing up potential evidence.
Well, if that were the case, then how about you limit all those people to the living room, limit all those people to the dining room?
Yep.
But they didn't do that. There were people roaming the house.
It's a lot of mistakes.
It's a lot of mistakes. And then when around 1 p.m., John and a family friend, unaccompanied by law enforcement, decide to do another check of the house. Why are they doing a check of the house and not law enforcement?
Is it possible that law enforcement did do a thorough sweep of the house and that they were convinced somehow that they just missed JonBenét's body in the wine cellar, in the middle of the room, uncovered by anything, and not hidden at all?
Well,
is it possible?
So this is what I tell people when they're on the stand. Anything is possible, but it's not probable given the evidence we see.
Yeah, fair.
Right? It just doesn't seem like if they did a thorough sweep would include every room, every nook, every cranny, every closet.
Yes.
Every door would be opened.
Yeah. It's a 6-year-old girl. She's little. Like, she could fit a lot of places.
She could hide. Someone could put her in a closet and have her bound and tied up and just stuck in a closet. You never know. But it seems to me that was a big misstep. And then finally, when John and his friend found her, John tried to untie the rope on her hands. He tried to untie the rope around her neck. And then he picked her up and carried her upstairs, laid her down in that living room where there were a plethora of people. So none of the crime scene was left undisturbed.
Yeah.
There would have been a lot of different people in the home at that time, and there could have been any sort of DNA transfer from John's clothing onto somebody else, onto JonBenét, from somebody else onto JonBenét's clothing. I mean, when he carried her upstairs, I can't imagine that Patsy just saw her daughter lying there and didn't touch her.
Exactly.
As a mother, I would want to go hug my child and try to hope that they're somehow still alive, something like that.
Is it possible that he thought that she was still alive or could be resuscitated?
I suppose it's possible. But if that's the case, then why are you so worried about untying her hands and not getting the ligature that was deeply ingrained in her neck off of her neck first? Because everything I read said he tried to untie her hands first.
Yeah. So you think that indicates that he was involved in some way?
I think it poses a lot of questions, and we have a lot more questions on this case than we do answers. You know, I think another problem that can't be explained from anything I've seen is upon JonBenét's autopsy, they found undigested chunks of pineapple in her stomach. The Ramseys said they had gotten home, JonBenét was asleep, they carried her upstairs, put her to bed, and that was that because it was late. But we do know that her brother Burke was having a snack of pineapple chunks with milk down in the dining room area, allegedly when JonBenét was supposed to be asleep.
Yeah.
So did she sneak down and steal some of that from Burke? Did she sneak down and get her own bowl of that? Although a second bowl was never located. They did say that the initial first bowl of pineapple was still on the table with a spoon in it when law enforcement arrived the next morning. So that's kind of weird too. Like she had to have gotten up to eat that pineapple at some point.
Yeah. And then probably killed immediately after eating the pineapple because like you said, it's undigested. Fruit digests fairly quickly. So do you think there was some sort of fight over the pineapple and that's what potentially led to JonBenét being killed?
I think that's one possibility, and I think that's the possibility that's been floated and called the brother theory. That certainly is one of them. There are just so many weird inconsistencies with this case in the investigation, in the evidence that was located. You know, going back to the ransom note for a moment, it was very lengthy. This wasn't a ransom note that said, we have your daughter, give us a lot of money or she's dead.
Yeah.
That would be simple, right? And if you are a bad guy or bad girl, a perpetrator that are in that home and you're going to steal and kidnap that young girl, it would seem to me you're going to write something quick. But this was something that was multiple pages. Like
multiple drafts.
Multiple drafts.
Multiple drafts is crazy.
And super detailed about the weirdest things. They said it almost quoted a couple different times from a couple different movies that involved kidnappings. One of the other odd things about it, they don't ask for $500,000. They don't ask for a nice rounded number. They ask for $118,000, which ironically is also the exact amount of John Ramsey's bonus that he received that December from his company.
Yeah.
I mean, who's going to know that?
A disgruntled person who works under John Ramsey at the company. Because if you're getting $118,000 bonuses, people work under you in some capacity.
That's probably true, but doesn't it seem weird that that's what they're going to request?
It does.
I'm looking to see. I might have that.
But why would they?
Oh, I do have it.
Oh, you do have it. Beautiful.
I do have it.
Lovely.
I'd like to be prepared.
Yes, you do.
You want me to read it?
Please.
Okay. Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We respect your business, but do not respect the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed. If you want her to see 1997, you must follow our instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of all of this. I don't think I have all of the pages, but it goes on and on to say, if you call the police, this will happen. If you do this, that will happen. And it goes on ad nauseum in detail about all of the what ifs if they don't follow the rules.
And they did call the police.
And they did call the police eventually.
But it's strange that it's like, we have your daughter. So essentially she has been taken from the home.
Right.
but then we murdered her because you called the police, and then we brought her back into the home, into the basement wine cellar, threw her in the middle of the room, like after tying her hands and choking her out, and then left the home.
But you know, that theory has a major flaw. By 6 a.m., that house, that neighborhood was crawling with law enforcement.
Yes.
So if you found that the Ramseys called the police and you told them not to, so now you're going to sneak the child who's either dead or incapacitated back into the home, sexually assault her with items located in the basement that were in Patsy Ramsey's art supplies, and then get out again undetected by all of the law enforcement in that neighborhood? Doesn't that seem a little far-fetched?
It seems impossible.
There's a few words in this at least this first page of this note that I just find bizarre. They're a small foreign faction.
Strange.
What the hell does that mean?
I know. Like,
they don't ask to put it in a bag. They don't ask to put it in a backpack. They want an attaché case.
Yeah.
What does that sound like to you?
A movie.
It sounds like a movie.
Yes.
It sounds like somebody who maybe is a little more affluent. Now, who in this case do we know that might be affluent?
The person who gets $118,000 bonuses back in the 90s. Was it wait, what year was it?
1996.
There you go. Yeah. So, yeah, exactly. But then put it in a brown paper bag.
Right.
Weird.
That doesn't make any sense either.
No.
There are so many things with this case that I think are just weird, but it really starts with the problems with the investigation. So one of the other issues I have is they claim that it's possible it was an intruder theory, right? If it was an intruder, they said that this person would have went out the basement window. Now, John Ramsey admitted that basement window had been broken for some time. He thought it had been fixed, but gosh darn it, it just never was. They don't seem like the people who are going to have a broken window and just leave it at that and not fix it.
Yeah.
They seem like the people who might have had people who would make sure the window got fixed.
100%.
Right?
100%.
Like, I don't see John Ramsey fixing it himself, but I do see him having people who do that kind of thing for him.
Yes.
But I looked at a lot of the photographs of that basement room, which, by the way, was very near to the room where JonBenét was found. It wasn't the same room, but it was in the basement area. There was a sort of a olive green piece of luggage, and it's an older style luggage, so it's the hard style back in the day that you would carry with a handle on top. This was long before they had the wheels on the bottom or anything else.
Yep.
And it is perpendicular to the wall where the window's at. Now, walk with me on this for a minute. If you are going to try to get out of that window, and let's say you're trying to carry the child out, right? It is perpendicular, meaning the sides of that, when you step on it, are going to wobble. If they wobble, it's going to tip over, and you're not going to get the boost you need to get up over the wall, into the window, and out of the house. Wouldn't it make more sense to put that suitcase up against the basement wall? So yes, you can step on it, but as you step on it and push forward, it's going to have the brace of the wall that holds it up. Doesn't that make more sense?
Makes a lot more sense.
Right. And there was a very, very faint footprint in dust on top of that piece of luggage. What's weird to me, that was the only thing of dust disturbed on it. If you are a kidnapper and you're grabbing something to stand on, granted, you may have gloves on, but wouldn't it make more sense that there's going to be more dust disturbed on that other than a perfectly small imprint of a foot?
Did they ever do like a test to see whose foot it was, whose shoe it was?
I think at some point they did look at the tread and do an analysis of that, but everything in this case was inconclusive.
So strange.
Very strange. There was a lot of attention on this case from the very beginning too, that, you know, the pageant scene that JonBenét was involved in may have brought out people who were crazy, people who saw her not as a young child, but as an adult, and may have brought out pedophiles or other people like that. What are your thoughts on that whole pageant scene issue?
That sounds very likely. No offense to anybody who enjoys pageants, who participates in pageants, but I feel like dressing up children in like hilarious amounts of makeup and adult clothing ish, and it's strange and would attract those types of people. So yeah, I absolutely think that that's within the realm of possibility. And there were even people who came forward, and there have been people who have confessed to killing JonBenét, who are clearly mentally ill or sick in some way, and probably are just obsessed with, the pictures and all the things that they've seen, correct?
Yeah, so let's take that in two parts. I think the pageant scene can bring out people like that.
Yeah.
When you look at some of the photos of her and some of the videos of her performing in those pageants, it's not just her hair is done and her makeup is done. In some of the talent portions of those things, she's dressed up as like a Las Vegas showgirl. Those are the kinds of outfits she has on. Now, maybe she's doing a dance routine, but
Yeah.
I mean, it was very grown up. It was not something you'd put a young child in, or at least you shouldn't put a young child in. So I think absolutely that could bring those type of people out of the woodwork. And I think it did. I think the guy's name was John Mark Carr. He was a teacher in Thailand, originally from the United States, but he confessed to doing this. He confessed and said, yes, this was me. I fell in love with her. We had a relationship. She wanted to be with me. All of these crazy, crazy thoughts.
The 6-year-old.
The 6-year-old.
Yeah.
And he was arrested in Thailand. I think I mentioned he was a teacher there.
Yeah.
This is not the kind of guy you want around
You have a pedophile as a teacher.
young kids. And he taught, I think it was like 2nd or 3rd grade. So very young kids.
So probably other victims that he had taught.
Exactly. So the United States extradited him, brought him back to face the music with regard to her death. And lo and behold, his DNA didn't match the DNA found on JonBenét.
I think it would be pretty easy to find whether he was in the country at the time. I mean, was he even in the country?
I think he was. I think
Okay.
he went to Thailand after that, if my memory serves me correctly.
Okay. But he was in Colorado too?
That part I don't recall, but
Okay.
it was just very weird.
Yeah.
And then there were times when Patsy Ramsey got very sick. She had cancer. And towards the end of her life, he had called and said, I want to tell Patsy what happened. I feel I owe it to her. And Patsy agreed that if he called, she would talk to him. But I don't think he ever called to have that conversation. And so that's just a really weird angle too. Like, why do you want to talk to the mom of the murder victim?
But he's also clearly very mentally ill.
True. True.
And you can't expect them to do rational things or make rational decisions.
But the investigators on this case were very, very able to clearly say that he was not involved, that the evidence did not link to him, and he couldn't provide some of the very specific details that were at the scene. He was only able to articulate things he'd saw in the media.
Yeah, I'll never understand that. But clearly, I mean, very mentally ill. Was he the only one who came forward and claimed to have been the person who murdered JonBenét?
I think there was another person who was already incarcerated for a murder who came forward and said, hey, I did this. I'm the person you're looking for. But again, that was not able to be proven by any stretch. Law enforcement looked into it. They had a lot of different tips on this case, and they looked into a lot of different tips. But I think part of the problem was, again, I go back to that crime scene being contaminated right from the beginning, and that can thwart any future potential solving of this case. DNA in 2025, an analysis of that is a whole lot different than it was in 1996.
Yeah.
And there, I think, have been at least 2 different times over the course of the last 2 decades that they have analyzed and reanalyzed a lot of the DNA and the evidence in the case. Now, I know that they were able to, they say, exclude and exonerate, which why they would use that word exonerate, I'm not really sure. But the DA at the time said that the Ramseys were all excluded and exonerated, as having done this.
In 2008.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think they did it again in 2013 or 2015. They did some more testing.
Okay.
Something like that. But I don't think they can say that conclusively. Did that one speck of DNA on the outside of her clothing match anyone in the family? No, it didn't. But do we know? Did they test every law enforcement person who was in that house, every family member, every family friend who came over, anybody who processed the scene, or at the lab that handled this? Did they verify that it wasn't their transfer DNA on those clothing pieces? And I don't know if they did.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good place for us to stop for now and then continue in the next episode with additional conversation about some of the theories, what happened when this went to court. What else would you want to cover in this next episode?
Well, I have some statistics we can talk about. I'd like to talk a little bit about the polygraphs the family passed.
Okay. Yep.
Kind of go from there.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. So if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Please message us on our Instagram page or our TikTok at BTV_pod.
Let us know your thoughts. Let us know who you think killed JonBenét and what theory best fits the evidence as you see it.
You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.